Today we continue our series on forgiveness. 2 weeks ago, if you might remember, I preached about how it's good for us to forgive ourselves and different techniques that we can forgive ourselves. Last week, I preached about how we can forgive others and why we need to forgive others and the techniques and how we can do that. Today, I would like to speak about what forgiveness is and what it is not. Because as we understand forgiveness, we'll find that it's good for our soul. So I start by saying what forgiveness is not. And there's 5 points that I have here. What forgiveness is not. These are 5 common misconceptions with regards to forgiveness. The first that I like to say is forgiveness is not fair. Forgiveness is not fair. From the human perspective, we think of fair or fairness as something that is equitable based on all things considered. We might say that if someone doesn't live up to what they're being asked to do, then they should be out. For instance, 3 strikes and you're out, right? Well, that doesn't have to do with forgiveness. That has to do with baseball. Forgiveness is knowing what justice demands, but throwing justice aside and granting mercy. You probably are familiar with an old ethics code called Hammurabi's Code, right? Jesus referred to it in the gospel, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Basically, this code was a way of enacting justice or fairness between people. So if you caused someone to lose their eye, then you would lose your own. That's the idea. That would keep the person who lost their eye from killing you. Well, mercy steps in and says, you know what? No. I'm going just to forgive you. I'm going to let go of that sense of justice, that idea of fairness. I will relieve you of your debt to me. I will not take your eye. I will forgive you. See, this is where it's not fair, right? There's not an equal balance. It's actually out of balance. Someone is saying, you have a debt to me, and I'm letting go of that because I know it's good for you and it's good for me. There's a great biblical story of Joseph and his brothers. You might remember this story. Joseph, the son of Jacob and Rachel in the Old Testament. And the story has that Joseph and his brothers grew up and they were shepherds of sheep, etc. And Joseph began having these prophetic dreams. And he began sharing those dreams. He was already well loved by his father, and his brothers were jealous of Joseph. And his dreams were about how his brothers would bow down before him, and his brothers didn't like that idea at all. So one day when they were out shepherding and they saw Joseph come out to join them, they decided to hatch a plot to kidnap Joseph and sell him into slavery. And so they did, and they went back to their dad, Jacob, and they said, hey, he got eaten by wild animals. I'm sorry, he's no longer alive, he's dead. Told him a lie. Well, Joseph got taken to Egypt, as you know, and there in Egypt, he was working as a slave, and then at one point was imprisoned and began to have dreams. And people began bringing their dreams to him, and he began explaining what those dreams were. Eventually, Pharaoh had a dream, and he explained Pharaoh's dream, and Pharaoh was so impressed that he made Joseph second in command in his own empire. Well, a great famine came throughout the whole empire, and Joseph's brothers did not have anything to eat, and so they came to Pharaoh to beg for food for his whole family. And so where did they go to? They went straight to the second in command. They went to Joseph. Joseph immediately recognized his brothers. They did not recognize him. And Joseph asked his brothers to bring the whole family back to Egypt. And when they did so, Joseph revealed to them who he was. At that point, his brothers were really afraid. Why? Because if it was all about fairness or justice, then Joseph, who was sold into slavery, would give his brothers their just due, right? Would punish them. And what did Joseph end up doing? Joseph said, guys, don't worry. I love you. God has brought you here so I could take care of you. He's arranged this whole thing. I forgive you. He said, in quote from Genesis, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." And Joseph forgave his brothers. So forgiveness is not fair. The second thing, forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Have you ever heard that phrase, forgive and forget? Sometimes you hear that. Did you know that's not from the Bible? You know where it's from? Don Quixote. Don Quixote would talk to his sidekick Sancho Panza, and they would have this chat, forgive and forget. So if you try to live by that, you're living by the way of Don Quixote, and he was chasing windmills, okay? So not a good person to follow. No, forgiveness has nothing to do with forgetting. Forgiveness is accepting the reality of the hurt and letting it go and going beyond. The memories are still there. The hurt and the pain is still there. That is not going to go away. But forgiveness is the acceptance of it and saying there's a greater good and moving beyond. Remember the story of Immaculée from Rwanda that I shared with y'all last week. Remember, Immaculée suffered enormous hurts when a close family member, someone she saw as a second father figure, ended up killing her whole family, was searching for her to kill her. And remember at the very end, I shared about how she had forgiven everybody, and as a sign of that forgiveness, we were all able to see when a photographer and a reporter went to her hometown, and this is years after this occurred, and she saw the brother of the man who had killed everybody in her family. And she ran up to the brother and put her arm around her and said, "Hey, take a picture of us together. It's okay, I've forgiven him." Do you think Immaculée has forgotten those things that had happened? No. She said it right then. Here's my brother, here's the brother who killed my family, but it's okay. It's okay. Forgiveness has nothing to do with forgetting. Forgiveness is letting go of the anger and hurt and letting go the desire to get back. It's choosing the good of letting those things go for the good of the other and the good of oneself. Number 3, forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness is not weakness, it's actually strength. Weak people don't forgive, okay? A lot of times people think forgiveness is something that is weak. Or maybe sometimes people think that they don't have to stand up for themselves if they forgive others. Sometimes people will think, I have to allow other people to hurt me or abuse me. Because I'm a Christian, I'm supposed to forgive. Forgiveness does not mean we allow people to hurt us. Forgiveness does not mean that we allow people to hurt us. If you are in an abusive relationship where someone regularly hurts you, you need to leave that relationship. There's help for you. Physical abuse has cycles. The abuse happens. Then there's a compulsion to make up, and lots of flowers and candies and all sorts of things. That just sets the stage for more abuse. And many times the cycle gets worse and worse. Because you forgive does not mean you should allow the hurt to happen. You are precious in the eyes of God, and you should be treated accordingly. If you are that person that regularly hurts someone, then you need to leave that relationship right now. And you need to go and get therapy. Remember, what you do to the least of God's people, you do to Jesus himself. And you'll be judged accordingly. Forgiveness is not about weakness. It's about strength. Standing up for oneself, knowing what is good for oneself and good for another. And when we forgive the faults or the hurt of someone, we want to help them not to do that again. Number 4, forgiveness is not forced. Forgiveness is not forced. We were all children once, okay? And we probably all got in fights with our brothers and sisters, unless you were a single child, or if you were perfect. Maybe some of you guys were perfect, but we probably got in fights with our brother or sister, and our mom and dad would come over and see what there was commotion about. Our sister was crying, and our mom says, "All right, Johnny, you need to apologize to your sister." Meanwhile, Mom had her hand on your shoulder and was gently squeezing your shoulder. And Johnny would be like, "I'm sorry, Sally, for pulling your hair," and trying to run away. And Mom would like, "Say it like you mean it." "Okay, I'm sorry, Sally." And then Dad would be next to Sally. "All right, Sally." A reassuring paw on her shoulder. And Sally would be like, "I forgive you." And then they both take off running away doing something else because that's so uncomfortable. And parents would do this and basically to try to teach how to forgive and to how to own one's sin or bad or whatever. We know this, but in a way, in that moment, that little scene that had developed for you, we know that that was all forced. Sally and Johnny did not have freedom to be able to say, okay, it's time for me to say I'm sorry, it's time to me to forgive. But Mom and Dad kind of had their hands there making them do it. You see, forgiveness is not forced. We cannot forgive someone if we feel compelled that this is something that we have to do. If someone is saying, "You must forgive me," it ain't going to happen. Or in our mind, if we have this compulsion thinking that I must forgive someone so that God will like me, you know what? It's not going to be complete. The truth of the matter, God loves you so deeply. Now, he wants you to forgive so you can live more fully and more completely. But he's not forcing that on you. You don't have to do that. It's good for you, and you should freely choose it. But it's not forced. Number 5. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. I've heard it many times as a priest. Father, I can't forgive this person because, I can't go back and see the person. Guess what? You don't have to, and you still can forgive the person. That's great news, right? Now, reconciliation is a great thing. It's a good thing for us to do. But forgiveness is not reconciliation. Forgiveness is the first step towards reconciliation. But forgiveness is not reconciliation. You have the power to forgive even if you don't see the person. Maybe the person is, 30 miles away. Maybe the person's 30 miles away and you still can forgive them. Now, if God moves in your heart and it's good for them and good for you to see the person and to verbally say, I forgive you, and maybe the person then accepts it, well, that's fantastic. But if that's not possible, you still can have that forgiveness. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. So these are 5 things that forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not fair. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness is not forced. And finally, forgiveness is not reconciliation. So what is forgiveness? Forgiveness is unconditional. No strings attached. It's a complete letting go. Complete letting go of that hurt, being absorbed into the mercy of God. It's complete free gift that we give to one another and give to ourselves. Ultimately, forgiveness is love. In the other gospel that we can read today, we hear what God's love is. God so loved the world that he sent his only Son, that whoever might believe in him will not perish, but will have eternal life. That's possible because God's heart is a heart of forgiveness. Forgiveness is love.